All right, everyone. Welcome to yet another YouTube live show. So, this particular YouTube live is all about how do you actually stop forgetting what you have studied. So, because this is one of the very important thing that we all go through whenever we are actually during exams, right? Like you are sitting in the exam hall and you have studied whole night or sometimes week and months, but when you go there, you forget everything, right? Or it could be sometimes forgetting what we have studied from the books. You might be actually have been written, right, like reading a lot of books, but sometimes what will happen is that we forget what we have studied. So in this particular live, you are going to actually understand that what is the reading process and what is that best way of this particular process. Like how do we actually retain something, what are the entire process that actually goes through. We're going to discover that. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do subscribe and be part of this particular community, and also click on that bell notification icon so that whenever we go live like this, you get notified so that you don't miss anything. And I'm very fascinated to see this community back again coming and learning and growing. We are all here to actually make sure that we become extraordinary at what we do. So let's get started, guys. So like how do you actually forget things? We need to understand that the reason why is because sometimes we know that whenever we want to start something, we'll start doing what? We start reading, right? And when we start reading, the biggest challenge is that there is a retention power that what we have in our mind. Sometimes whatever we read, we can retain it for an hour. Like if somebody asks you a question back again after an hour, and can you actually say that back? We can't, right? We can't remember. But so the very important process is not just the reading, but it is how you read it, right? That's what all it matters, right? Once you actually read it, so what are the various different steps that is actually involving in this process? Let's discover that. The second thing is that we remembering certain stuff, right? Like whatever we actually learn or whatever we study, we want to remember. You are actually going to discover two different ways of reading today, two different types that what you need to actually inculcate in this journey so that you don't forget what you have studied. You're also going to actually understand two more different strategies today. So how do you remember what you have studied? And you're also going to understand that sometimes what we do is when it comes to reading is we just read like a theory. There is no emotion involved and stuff like that. When it comes to remembering, we try to by heart, right? So those strategies are outdated. So what are the various different things that what you can do in order to read better and remember better? And also you are going to actually understand how do you actually retain what you have studied. Like because sometimes what will happen, so after an hour or two, if somebody asks you, can you actually reproduce that? You can do it. But after a day or two, you forget it. Like how do you actually retain? So you're going to actually understand one of the best strategy that what you can inculcate to remember what you have studied and also retain it for a week, for a month, and sometimes even for a year, right? How do you actually do that, and what are the strategies that what we can do? We are going to discover that in today's live session. And you're also going to understand that once you actually retain, the very important thing is that yeah, it is there, but sometimes what will happen, you know that it is there but you cannot recall, right? It is remembered and retained for a longer period of time, but whenever you want to recall that, whenever you want to revise that, you will not be able to understand. You're going to understand one more important strategy that will actually help you to pull that up, whatever that information that what you have got and whatever that what you have taken forward, you're going to pull that up. So that is what something that what we're going to discover. And what also you're also going to understand how do you reproduce that, where you have to recreate that, like sometimes in the exams, right? If when it comes to books, you may not need to reproduce that, right? But when it comes to exam, you have to reproduce that. When a question is asked, you have to write a long answers, like whatever you remember and all of that. So you're going to discover a very important thing, because most of the time whenever we are actually reproducing, so what will happen when we have to recreate that, we forget everything, right? Because our mind is going in a chaotic mode and our emotion is actually going with the anxiety, fear, right? Like I'm not getting that and all of that. We are going to discover step by step today in this session, how do we do all this 5 step of a process so that you don't forget what you have studied. Let's get started with this particular thing. So one of the very important thing, the way how we read today. So most of the time whenever we are reading something, the biggest challenge that is actually happening is that we read something from the book with no emotion, right? No energy, no involvement, no interest. There are so many things, because this human being is not one dimensional. Because when you're actually reading through your eyes, we're just reading through this, which is body, physical layer. But we also have a mental layer, we have an emotional layer, we have an energy layer. So if something needs to be permanently there within your system, it's very important you are learning in a 4-dimension way. So there are various different activities you can do, right? Because if it is just a physical print, like if you see any book or any paper, that what you see it in as Xerox, it's just transferring, right? It's just physical layer, there is no mental, emotional and energy layer. But when it comes to human being, we have multiple layer, and the information that whatever we have read will go into multiple layer when we do this. What is that? When we discuss and teach to others. So what do I mean by that? Let's consider you actually read this book, and then what you do is that you share it with others. Guess what is happening? When you are actually sharing it with other, or when you are just discussing certain points with others, or when you have read an academical book, could be physics, chemistry, maths, social science, or it could be like your engineering syllabus, BCom, BBM, or any of these things. When you discuss, there is a transfer of all the other 3 dimension also. It's not just physical, but it is where you are sharing it from the mental, you are sharing it with emotion, you are sharing it with energy. So that is when you are actually going to retain that longer. So don't just read something. Whenever you are sitting for a reading of anything, see if you can schedule a time in a day where you can discuss with that with a friend, or you can teach that to a friend. Because when you are teaching that to a friend, you cannot be just like a textbook, right? You have to share that. Whenever you are sharing, all the 4 dimensions of your life is actually working through you, and at that time you actually retain better. All right, I know for sure you know this already by doing this with experiments, right? Like whenever you are actually young, right, whatever the concept that what you actually understand it deeper, when you actually teach it, have you observed that it actually retains little longer than what it used to be? And that's the possibility. When you actually give, that is when you're going to gain more. So hope this one actually got into your mind. So the second thing that is very, very important, that what we have to do when we are reading itself, not just reading it from surface, but we also need to take it from sensory learning. So what is sensory learning? Which means that we have 5 sense organs, right? Eyes, ears, nose, right? Tongue and skin, right? We are actually receiving information through all these things. Like right now, I'm actually seeing you, right? So, or I'm seeing my computer, right? So I'm actually receiving an information, right? Through my eyes. I'm also hearing to my own voice. So I'm also receiving that. You are hearing my voice. You're receiving that. And this whole brain is interpreting all this sensory information, right? But to retain that longer, just 1 or 2 is not enough. Because if you are actually just reading through eyes, only one. But if you are reading and also listening, two sensory organs are involved, right? If you can read it, listen through that, and also if you can actually, because you cannot smell things, right? But if you can feel that, that is when all these 3 things, that other things like nose, touch, like, and the tongue, right, all these things can be actually still felt more. So that is where sensory learning is a very, very important type of learning, that what you can inculcate. Like if you see novels, if you read a novel, you can remember that story like crazy, because we as a being, human beings, we remember, we tend to experience things and retain our experience. Think about the past. Can you actually tell me everything of your past? You cannot. You have forgotten many things. Why do you think so that we forget things? The reason is because there is no complete involvement. But think about situations where something very bad happened in your life. You remember that still now, even for after years, we still remember that. Why is that so? Because all the 4 dimensions are involved, and it is a sensory imprint, right? Whenever something that is a sensory imprint, we tend to remember more, we don't forget that. So when you actually try to involve this bigger concept, but these are very fundamental concepts, but once you actually do that in your reading, that is how retention is going to happen more. So the second step when it comes to remembering, which after reading we have to remember. So what are the things that what you can actually inculcate? So I love these 2 strategies. Okay, so these are very, very powerful ones. Number one is called as power of association. What is power of association? I learned this, one of the very, very important this particular method by a person called as Biswarup Roy Chaudhary. He has written this book called as Dynamic Memory Methods. So he was one of my mentor when I was in my 8th standard, right? So I actually got an learning and awareness. I started reading his books on memory, right? I started understanding that what is power of association means. How to, because as human beings, we learn, like for example, think about it. you know your regional language. If you want to know another language, how do you actually learn that? You learn that and remember that only because you already know one. That is actually through power of association. Right? So I started applying this particular concept in various areas of my life, in terms of my studies, in terms of reading books, in terms of various different things, in terms of remembering things. Power of associations is a very, very, very important concept that I started learning through, like, where we associate things so that it actually remember, right? So that is one of the very important thing that what you can actually apply. The second thing is also called as accelerated learning method. So what is accelerated learning method stand for? Here, so in college, what we actually learn is that a linear method. They will teach you something, you have to buy hard that and get it forward. That's how we remember. But accelerated learning technique or a method goes in a different way. So here we use different parts of our brain to actually learn, right? Because you need to understand, when we are learning something, just a plain one dimensional, but we are a four dimensional being where we have body, mind, emotion, and energy. So it doesn't go inside. But when we try to involve, when we try to actually apply ourselves completely into that, it's going to go more. I'm going to give you some examples. For example, if I tell you to remember 10 different words right away, you will forget certain things. But if I actually tell you those 10 words like a story, where it is all linked and associated, you tend to remember that in whichever order you want to. The reason is because we are actually a visual beings. For example, I will give you an example. If I tell you right now the word apple, what comes to your mind right now? When I say apple, you will either think of a fruit or you will think of an Apple iPhone, right? But did that come like APPLE? No. But when we are reading, like, our mind doesn't actually get things through words or letters. It gets through images and videos. So when we actually try to learn what we are learning, most of the time it is learning through words and letters, so we forget. But if it is actually happening where this letters, which are one dimensional or two dimensional letters, if it is turned into three and four dimensional image and videos, we tend to remember more. And that's what it is all about. So whatever that what you are studying in college, if you can actually turn that into a different thing. See, this is something like this, right? If you try to put a square cube in a in a circle, it will not get inside. So you need to understand there are various different levels and layers to how we learn, and we need to understand through that. All right, hope you got this particular thing. So these are very, very powerful. In a program called as Memory Magic, we actually teach this various different things. There are about more than 25 different accelerated learning methods that what you can implement while knowing and remembering your derivations or long form theories and the short form or coding or various different things where you apply your logic. You're applying the other side of the brain, which is emotion. Together, amazing things can be done. The next challenge that comes, even after remembering, we actually forget that within a week, even though we actually try to turn the text into image or video and feel that and all of it. But sometimes even after doing that, we have a challenge in retaining. So what do we do for that? So one of the very, very important principle that I learned early on when I scored 97 in my 10th, and I got 9.37 CGPA in my first year of my engineering. So like people were asking me like, how are you actually doing this? Because I was doing various different activities, but still I was able to score well. Right? How that particular thing happened? Because I knew this. Reading, I don't do like others in an ordinary way. I read it in a little different way. That's what I was sharing here. I don't remember things the normal way. So I see that how I can actually, these are not rocket science. These are very simple things, but how is different? Not what we learn, everybody learns the same way, but how we learn, that makes the difference. That makes learning really enjoyable. Right? So when it comes to retaining, whatever you actually learn, so what is that what you can do? So I call this as spaced repetition learning. This is something that very, very important. Early on, I actually started learning from the best of the best mentors in terms of understanding our own brain. Our brain actually retains if it is actually given some space. Most of us, what we do, we tend to learn one subject one whole day. So now our brain starts getting bored and it starts forgetting what it has actually learned. So there is something called a spaced learning. So which means that you give spaced revision or spaced repetition, and you actually do it in the right time, which means that So whatever that what you actually learn, okay, it could be a new subject or whatever that what you learn from your teachers, so you have to actually get through that by this reading and remembering process within first 24 hours. Then you give a space, you don't go back to that, right, trying to retain that. Go back and try retaining that back again on seventh day after first 24 hours. The next thing is that seventh day, and the next space repetition you have to do it on 30th day. So which means that whatever you study that day itself, okay, make sure that you try to remember and retain, try to retain that, like, okay, this is what it is. You try to go back, and if you want to write that down, you can also try to recall that and reproduce that. Then what do? You don't actually stop there. You're going to go back on seventh day. Till that time you're free, you can still keep on doing various different things. You don't get yourself pressurized, right? So that is actually, that process of etching is happening in your brain. It takes a little time to actually settle and create a category to that in your brain system and all of that. And then seventh day, then what will happen, you are actually trying to trigger that same neuronal pathways, because what will happen in our brain, we have a lot of neurons, and these neurons try creating paths. Whenever we are trying to learn something new, it's going to find out, is there something that I already know, right? That is power of association, which I shared, so that it start connecting there. Or can I actually know whatever I actually trying to learn something new, so can I actually build this with spaced repetition, so that I try to remember that it, I try to integrate that. So that is very, very important. Okay, I hope that you actually understood with this particular thing. That is actually a method that what we actually go here of 24 hours, 7 days, and 30 days, right? Then you can actually try to retain that and recall that whenever you want to, it will work. The next thing is that we have a challenge of recalling during the time of exams. You will not be able to recall that information and reproduce that information on your exam paper. That is the fifth step. So what are the things that what you can do in order to recall that? So one of the best method that what you can do in order to recall what you have actually studied, like you have done all the three steps right, but when it comes to recalling, it is not happening. So what is very, very important is having hooks and triggers. See, for example, right now, as I told you, if you have done it right with power of association with the story and stuff like that, it is also very important that you have to remember the starting point of the story. If you do not have that hook and trigger to pull things up, then it will not be happening, right? For many people, even though they have studied for hours and for days and months, they'll not be able to recall when it's the very, very important time. So the reason is because they don't have the starting hook. What is that one thing that I definitely need to remember? So what I usually suggest people is that just before one day during the exam, so whenever you have created this all the three steps of reading and remembering and retaining, you have, when recall comes, it has to come, right? For example, formulas. Okay, so you have read the formula, you have actually applied the very important principles of reading, and then you also have important principles of remembering and retaining. But when it comes to recalling, it's not happening. You don't get the formula. So what I would usually suggest, just before the exam, you need to have one sheet of paper where you need to have all your formulas. Very, very important hooks. If you just look at that, there is something called as, in our brain, we have something called as photographic memory. What does that mean? We can actually literally capture an entire photo into our brain, and whenever we want to actually recall certain things, we can go back to that, right? That is the possibility that is there with human systems, right? If you, I know for sure some of you actually can, while writing your exams, you can also go back to that particular page. Not everything will be actually remembered, but that one specific important thing, and that is what I want you to work a little bit to create hook sheets, right? So that actually creates that possibility for you to remember. For example, you have actually this very important thing where a very big long answer that is actually coming in. All right, and you know that this is a very important question. So what you can actually do about that, you can say that 10 important keywords of that. You don't need to write down everything that notes. 10 important keywords just before the exam, you actually see that and understand, okay, this is the flow, you got it, and then you move on. You even just the eyes, just that. So now what will happen, you have multiple triggers and hooks for that question that you have already recently, just about an hour or two, you have read that. That sheet is a very, very important thing. That is very simplified ones. It doesn't have too much of detailing, but that itself is enough for you to actually build things forward. Hope you are able to understand that, right? That is the recalling, best recalling method. You need to have some resources that needs to be created at the last moment that actually helps you. Yeah. But on a joke note, don't take that sheets into your exams room. Huh? That is very, very important. Okay, so you have to keep that in your mind. Okay, that's very, very important. Then on the fifth one, that is reproduce. For many people, the challenge is like they can recall also. They also know exactly what it is. But because of the mind chatter that happens in the mind, and because of the emotional feeling of anxiety and fear, they forget. So that is where it is very important that you keep yourself calm and clear mind and emotion during the time of exam. So I have seen this. Some of the people actually say this. See, I actually go to exam room, I've done all the steps, but when I go to the exam, I remember this Instagram trending music, and I forget everything, right? Because just before that, they might have actually heard it, or just 1 week before, they keep getting that ringtones or the musics and stuff like that, and they forget everything. So the very important thing is that, see, because if you tell your mind what not to do, it will do that. So that is where it is very, very important. You just go with the flow. Okay, if it is actually happening, just be calm. It's going to come. Be positive. That is where you need to actually have a good conversation with your mind and your emotion. We teach a process in memory magic, right? So where you can actually literally bring that calmness, right, just before the exams, because you do, because if you are actually have done the, see, the fear of failure or fear of challenge will come to those who have not prepared. But if you have done these steps right, you don't need to fear, right? So you just need to balance yourself up, right, with your mind and emotion, so that it is there for your benefit and support. And see, think about it. If you have learned this in a fun way, in a learning way, where it is actually that, you know, these are the hooks, these are the things, it will actually support you. But it is just that you have to keep your mind calm and your emotions completely balanced. So that is very, very important. Hope you actually got the ideas here from this particular live. So I'm just coming in every single here week just to support you in various different areas of your life and start building these things up, right? And if you are actually liking this, and if you want to actually improve various different areas of your life, please do check out various different videos on this channel. And also, if you have not clicked on that subscribe button, click on that subscribe, and also give this like, and also share it with those people who could benefit from this, right? People might be going through a lot of exam fears and tensions and stuff like that. So please also share it with them so that it can benefit them, your cousins, your friends, and all of them. So with that saying, so if you're loving this, if you're enjoying this, I would love to come up with more and more YouTube live like this. Also share what are the types of YouTube lives that you would like to have in the future, also in the comment box. So I would love to actually add in more and more value in the coming weeks and days. Thank you so much, everybody, and look forward to see you in the next YouTube live. Till then, be extraordinary. Thank you.